Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Ghost in Chicago by Worthwise. In the summer of 2009, I was visiting Chicago for a work trip and stayed at the historic Hilton Chicago across from Grant Park. My sister also lives in Chicago, and my trip coincided with her bachelorette party. After work on a Friday evening, I had dinner with my sister and two of her friends. I distinctly remember only having one glass of wine at dinner, since the next night would likely include more drinking at the bachelorette party. After dinner, I went back to the hotel and fell asleep. While sleeping, I started having a vivid dream. I was stuck in an elevator. The elevator stopped working, and I tried using the intercom to call the operator. The operator started screaming at me through the intercom. It sounded like a cacophony of multiple voices screaming. Suddenly I woke up, my heart racing. And that's when I realized being stuck in the elevator was a dream, and the voices that were screaming at me were actually coming from the hallway. A group of people walking through the hallway were being ridiculously loud. Reality hit me that I had been woken up, and I remember feeling very annoyed and thinking I probably wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. I was curled up in a fetal position on my right side, and I flipped over to my left side so I could see the time on the digital clock. It was 4 a.m. I sighed, feeling anxious about whether or not I'd be able to fall back asleep. And I then rolled over from the fetal position onto my back. And that's when I saw it. Standing at the foot of the bed, directly in front of me, was a man. This man was not completely solid, but more solid than an apparition. I could make out every single detail on this man's face, but there was definitely a low-key glow radiating through him. To this day, I could spot this man in a lineup. His hair was reddish and thinning, high cheekbones, faint mustache, and a pointy nose. He was wearing a cut-off Celtics jersey, and he was staring at me and smiling slightly. Creepy in a "I'm standing in your hotel room staring at you" creepy way, but not overly creepy. I did not sense this person to be evil, but I was still scared. We stared at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably 10 or 20 seconds. My thought process during this time went something like, did one of those people in the hallway break into my room? No, this doesn't feel like a real person. This feels like a ghost. Maybe it's my guardian angel. Shouldn't my guardian angel be wearing something nicer than a cut-off jersey? Am I having one of those sleep paralysis moments? Can I move? If it's a ghost, wouldn't he have left by now? He's still staring at me. It must be a real person. Oh my God, there's a real person in here. At that moment, I decided the person was real. I sat up in bed and screamed while staring directly at this guy. And all of a sudden, right before my eyes, he just faded away. Almost like pixels dissolving into the air. I was still sitting in the same spot, breathing heavily. While sitting there, I started looking around the room because I was still confused about what had just happened. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar, and as I looked into the dark doorway, I saw his face again, staring right back at me. We locked eyes, and then once again, he just faded away like pixels. I had never been so scared in my life. I felt incapable of moving or doing anything. I really was that scared. I curled up under the bed covers completely awake for the next hour. Eventually, I grabbed my cell phone off the nightstand and called my boyfriend, now husband. It was 6 a.m. in New York at that point, and he didn't answer. Eventually, I got up and went to yoga in the park with my boss that morning and told her the entire story. Then I asked 2 different hotel employees if they ever heard any stories, and they said no. I can't imagine that is true given the historic nature of the hotel. Later that morning, I talked to my boyfriend, now husband, and he said it was probably a remote viewer who was just having some fun getting into different hotel rooms. I don't know what it was, but I know it happened. Friend Visits My Haunted House by Cole H. The area I live in is one of the oldest in my country. It dates back to the late 1600s. The history of the region as a whole is rather blood-soaked, and the city itself is notorious for its hauntings. My home was built in the early 1900s, making one of the oldest in my section of the town. The only buildings that are older date back to the 16 to 1700s. My home has two sets of staircases. A more ornate staircase at the front of the home, obviously meaning to impress guests. The other is a steep, dark, fully enclosed set of stairs at the back of the house. A staircase that is obviously meant for servants. It even leads from the kitchen, which has a butler's pantry, to the second floor of the home. My house even had a carriage barn in the back. My father had to tear the barn down when I was a kid, as it had become dangerously unstable and there was just no saving it. The foundation, however, is still there. I have a friend that I hang out with pretty regularly, and she has had paranormal experiences. While we don't consider ourselves mediums or anything, we do consider ourselves a bit more open to the world around us than most people are. A few months ago, she came over to my house for the first time. There was a concert going on at a nearby park that we were planning on attending. We met at my house because the concert was outdoors and it was too hot to meet at the event. So we met at my house, had dinner, and had my mother drive us down. When she got to my place, the first thing she did was marvel at just how heavy the air in my house felt. She said it felt like the house was welcoming her in. We had a good hour or two before we had to get ready, and she had heard all about my experiences. So I took her through the home and showed her where the hot spots were. I took her everywhere, from my old bedroom to the upstairs bathroom. I mean everywhere. Even the basement. I even went so far as to point out all the pieces of furniture we had in the basement that my grandfather had made before his death in the 90s. While we were walking around, my friend kept remarking on how heavy the air felt, how she felt like she was being watched, and how the atmosphere seemed to shift and change depending on what we were talking about. Shortly before dinner, we went down to the basement so my friend could throw something in my washer. She had gotten a stain on her clothes earlier in the day. So being pressed for time, she simply brought a change of clothes and asked if she could wash her clothes at my house. While she was standing at the washer, she mentioned that she felt like there was something standing right behind her, staring over her shoulder, something that I had felt so often down there, that I had actually grown used to. She said that it didn't so much feel threatening, just that whatever was down there wanted us to leave. We went upstairs to sit in my living room and talk while we waited for her laundry to finish. While we were talking, I realized there were two places on my property that I had had experiences that I hadn't shown to my friend. So I got up to take her to those places. The first place was my back stairs. The second she walked through the door that led to the back door, her demeanor started to change. She went from smiling and joking around to scared and saying that she was starting to not feel well. So we left the back stairs and went back to the living room. I took her to the backyard as well, but nothing really happened, and again, it was too hot to stay outside. My friend started talking about how she felt like there were at least familial presences in the house, which makes sense. We have a memorial statue for a baby my parents lost shortly after birth, sitting on our porch, and we have a lot of family heirlooms in the house. But then she said something that left me pretty shaken. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that whatever familiar presences were in the home, as well as whatever entities were there, were almost certainly protecting my family and I for whatever was up the back stairs. It was just after she said that we both felt the very air around us change. It was like the spirits were telling us to stop talking about them. It was at that moment that we both realized that even though the good spirits in my home were protecting us, they didn't like people talking about them at length. They were the sort of spirits that wanted to be acknowledged and then left alone. As soon as we came to that realization, I pulled out my phone and started texting a mutual friend of ours. I had been planning on doing a bit of ghost hunting around my house to celebrate the coming Halloween season. We were never going to do anything beyond sneak around my house at night and scare ourselves shitless. But our mutual friend had purchased a couple of pieces of actual equipment and was acting a little eager. We had originally been planning on doing a little adventuring to celebrate the coming of fall and the start of spooky season. We all loved Halloween. I was planning on telling her and anyone else that we had with us something along these lines. No ghost hunting equipment is to be brought into my house. No EVP stuff, no EMF gauges, no digital audio recorders, etc. Cameras are okay, but if I tell you to not record in a certain area, I'm going to expect you to respect my wishes. I was going to make it so the rules would be as clear and easy to follow as possible. I realized that if I let her anywhere near my house, this friend would most likely get overexcited and ignore the rules that I was planning on putting in place. By doing so, she might unleash something that I wouldn't be able to stop. I ended up canceling the entire hunt out of an overabundance of caution, and I unfortunately had to tell this person I was texting that I didn't think it would be a good idea for her to come over at all. Ever. I feel like I dodged a major bullet. But I also feel like I'm now responsible for protecting people from my house, as well as protecting my house from people looking to take advantage of the situation. It's important to note that in the days after my friend came over, the air in the house felt lighter, almost like the spirits were thanking us for acknowledging them. I've also taken to quietly announcing myself and my intentions whenever I go down to the basement. I usually say something along the lines of, "Hello, I'm just coming down here to deal with my laundry. I'm not here to disturb you. I'll be leaving the basement as soon as I'm finished with my chore." This is something small that has helped with the overbearing feeling a great deal. The Coincidence is Too Close by Astronaut Zero. Everything that happened in this recount was over the years we all lived with my mom. I tell people this in person, but couldn't think of where to post it. In April 2012, we moved from one side of town to the other, a simple house swap which is common in the UK. We moved in quickly and settled in pretty quickly too. A few weeks went by and we had nothing to note. It just seemed normal. 6 months there, and my sister started talking about the ghost that lives in the house and how she's called it Kevin. We all laughed about it, even her, because we hadn't seen or heard anything that would suggest a haunting. One night I was playing on my PS4 with my brother, probably Call of Duty. The game is irrelevant. We heard our sister screaming to my stepdad asking, "Did you just throw my remote at me?" We laughed but were intrigued, so we asked her what the fuck she was shouting about. She explained that she was doing homework, and then her door opened and her Xbox controller was thrown at her from the other side of the room. She didn't use the controller, so this was a little strange, but we just told her she was being stupid and went back to gaming. A couple of nights went by and the same thing happened again. The controller was thrown and she was shouting at my stepdad. He then said back, "Why the fuck would I get up, go upstairs to your room, throw your controller at you, come back downstairs and carry on watching TV?" She was confused by it and just said, "Then this house is actually haunted if nobody did it." I decided to chill out and watch TV with my stepdad that night. I wasn't at school the next day, weekends, so I was up until 3 a.m.-ish, and at about 2 a.m. we were just getting through a film. We heard what sounded like someone walking across the landing to the toilet, and then to the top of the stairs. My bedroom door was right at the top of the stairs, so I shouted up, "Get out of my room!" My mom went to bed around 10 or 11, so she shouted down, "Nobody's there, what are you talking about?" My stepdad said back, "We just heard someone walk to the toilet and then walk to the top of the stairs." The exchange went on for a couple of minutes and finished with, "Whatever," from both ends of the conversation. The walking noises kept happening. One morning soon after the controller incidents, my sister asked if anyone came to her room in the early hours. She'd seen a black figure in her doorway watching her. None of us knew what she was talking about, and that's when Kevin was mentioned more frequently. On occasions, my mom would ask if anyone had walked past her because she felt breathing on her neck. I always said, probably Kevin. She laughed it off, but I could tell she didn't want to admit there might be a ghost. That night I was in bed watching Family Guy or some other shit TV program, and I saw a white figure in my doorway, even though my doorway was closed before I went to bed. I turned my TV off, rolled over, and went to sleep. I couldn't see it, couldn't be bothered to deal with it. The appearances never happened again after that, but the walking never stopped, and it was always between 2 and 2:30 a.m. We eventually just blocked out the noise, and it didn't really affect us too much. 2 years ago, we experienced something that has changed how I look at the house forever. I've moved out since, but I know this house is haunted because of this event. My stepdad was on his way out with his mates to go do some repairs for one of them, and a man walked past them and just stood around looking at the houses. They all drove off, and he stayed still. My mom, who saw my stepdad off, saw the man and asked if he was with them. And the conversation went like this. "Oh, no, I used to live here in the haunted house." "Which one?" my mom replied, and he pointed to our house. My mom then said, "Why is it haunted?" And he told her, "The family that lived there had a daughter who was murdered by her boyfriend. Her bedroom was at the end of the landing. That was my sister's room." My mom then told them that we already knew the house was haunted and that my sister called it Kevin. He chuckled and told her, "No, the ghost is called Vicky. Her brother is called Kevin." He said his farewells, but just before he left, my mom got the surname of the family from him. My mom recognized the surname because while she was growing up, there was an elderly couple that lived near her with the same surname. She phoned her auntie and asked about the family, and she told my mom, "Yeah, they used to live there, but they moved because they lost their daughter, and they didn't like it there because of the bad memory. And then they moved to where my mom grew up." Something Wrong at Our New House, submitted by Dan W. This all began when my wife and I decided to build a new house rather than buy an existing one. We did a lot of research as to where we wanted to build our permanent home and found a great spot in a new limited subdivision. When I say limited, I don't think that's a technical real estate term, but it was a one-street neighborhood surrounded by forestry. We were going to live at the very end and had 3 acres in our backyard and off to the side, which was a little bit larger than most of our neighbors' yards. Part of the reason that we wanted the place in the first place. It was exciting to be doing the project from the ground up, working with the architects and their design people. The whole process took months, and I spent a lot of time after work and on weekends popping out to look at the progress and meet with contractors and that sort of thing. Soon we had our house, as other houses were going up in the neighborhood too. I'll take a few seconds and describe the house for the rest of the story. There was a main foyer with a large staircase after the foyer in our front hall when you entered. Off to the right was my home office and library. Off to the left was our formal living room that opened up into our dining room. The dining room and kitchen were open to each other, separated by a breakfast bar, and on the other side of that was our massive family room that opened up onto our deck off the back of the house. There was another door to the deck from our dining room as well. We had a 3-car garage, 4 bedrooms upstairs with an attic cupola as a 3rd floor where my kids had a lot of their stuff. At the time, all of our kids were home. Joe was 18 getting ready for college, Jody was 15 and in high school, and my little guy, Will, was 12. I have a successful business as a clinical psychologist that I run from the home. My wife is a realtor who will smack me for referring to our neighborhood as limited. I suppose I should have checked with her before writing this, but she happens to be out of town, so that's my excuse. Yeah, I could call or text, but that doesn't matter. The house was finally built and we moved in mid-August of that year. Perfect timing for our kids to be ready for school and a couple of weeks to get settled in. Everyone was loving the house and the yard and the woods right next door, and my wife decided we should have Thanksgiving celebrated at our place that year. I don't have a very large family, but my wife does, and I love to cook, so of course I said it was a great idea. Her brother and sister came with their families on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My 2 nephews and 2 nieces, both 2 with each brother and sister-in-law, were obviously with them. All of them were in their teens, and I was surprised that they were actually having a good time. You know how teens can get sullen on family vacations, but my kids got along with them very well, and half the time they were playing video games and just laughing. That night I was up later than everyone getting things ready for the next day so as to not have a mad rush with food on Thanksgiving. Everyone else headed off to bed, and I kept up with my prep and a couple of beers. My brother-in-law stayed around too. We were both talking late into the night, and ended up falling asleep in my living room. I woke up around 3 in the morning, noticing that it was really cold in the house, despite a fire in the fireplace and the heat on. My brother-in-law was in a recliner and sawing wood, so I just got up quietly to see the thermostat. It was working, and that's when I noticed the front door and storm door were wide open. I closed them after looking around outside and went back to the living room to wake my brother-in-law up for bed. In the time that I had walked to the front foyer, the back door to our deck had been slid open and was letting the cold air in as well. I looked at my brother-in-law, but he was out like a light. I figured somehow one of the kids had opened or left the doors open in the front, and the wind had knocked them open completely. I mean, looking back, it was a stupid thought, as there was no way that that could have possibly happened. I still don't have any explanation for the back sliding door, but I made a point to tell everyone to keep the doors shut as I wasn't heating the outside. I was turning into my father. I got into bed, as did my brother-in-law, and I knew I would have to be up by 6 to get my smoker ready and another turkey ready for the inside oven. Thankfully, I had done all the prep work the day before. Yay me. When I woke up, my wife was barely stirring, and I mentioned the doors to her. She told me that she had personally locked the front door before going upstairs and couldn't tell me why they were open. I told her I was going to remind everyone to make sure the doors were shut, and she sleepily agreed and went back to sleep, saying she would be up by 7. The house was totally quiet as everyone was sleeping in. Perfect, I thought. I could have my first cup of coffee and get things rolling. I love my family, but moments like that are awesome to me. Knowing that they're all there and safe, having a chance to clear my head and be thankful for everything we had, and then be able to share my love with them and my food later on. Sounds cheesy, but hey, that's me. It's the truth. It was about 6:30 after I had gotten the smoker going out on the deck and came back into the kitchen. I was sipping my coffee and I heard a thumping down in the basement. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, so I wandered over, opened the door and flicked on the lights and walked downstairs. The thumping was getting louder as I walked down the stairs, and I couldn't think of what was making that noise. Then I thought maybe my wife had woken up and thrown some laundry in the washing machine, and it had gotten off kilter. That was my explanation. As soon as I got to my basement, I looked around and turned on the other recessed lighting, and the thumping stopped. We have a finished basement with another living area down there, a pool table and a bar for entertaining. For 1 second, I thought maybe some of the kids had come down here to this gaming system and maybe fallen asleep on one of the couches. But upon inspection, the basement was empty. I stood there just trying to figure out what that thumping noise was. And that's when both the dryer and washer doors opened and slammed shut on their own. I had my back to the laundry area when this happened, so I didn't actually see it, but I sure as hell heard it. I jumped as I turned around and then walked over to the machines. I stared at them for a minute and then shrugged my shoulders. Was I just hearing all this in my head? As a clinical psychologist, I know that this is totally possible, but I was trying to add everything up. The strange open doors, the weird sound down here, and I was sure I heard the dryer and washing machine doors open and shut. I wasn't jumping to any conclusions. I was trying to think of rational explanations for everything. But I also knew that everyone was going to be waking up soon, and I needed to get my breakfast pizza and casserole in the ovens to warm up. I walked back upstairs and turned the lights off, and as soon as I got to closing the door, I heard the dryer and washing machine doors open and slam shut again. I couldn't figure it out. I figured I would talk to my wife about it when I got a chance, but I didn't want to tell the entire family strange things were going on and run the risk of ruining Thanksgiving. I was a staunch disbeliever in the paranormal and am still skeptical today, even after telling the rest of my story. I could hear people starting to get up and move around upstairs, so I got breakfast things going, got the big dining room table set for everyone, and waited for them to come down. My wife came down, as did everyone else, in their pajamas, wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving. My brother-in-law asked me about the smoker and offered his help, which I gladly accepted. Everyone was enjoying their coffee and juice and breakfast when I pulled my wife aside and told her about what I had heard in the basement. She had a strange look come over her face and said, "Well, I wanted to tell you something too." I asked her what was up, and she said while she was washing her face in our master bath, the tub faucet came on and the jets on our Whirlpool tub started up. She was worried that maybe there was an electrical problem with the tub, but that didn't explain why the water turned on. I shook my head and said, "Something very strange is going on here." We both agreed to keep things to ourselves, but she is an avid nut about the paranormal, and giggling told me she was wondering what else the day would bring. I told her that wasn't funny, gave her a quick swat on her ass, and kissed her and said Happy Thanksgiving. The rest of the morning was most of everyone just kind of wandering around as we were going to eat at 3. Kids were playing their video games and some were watching the Macy's Day Parade, and everyone was talking amongst themselves about girls and boys and all that kind of thing, except for my 12-year-old and my 11-year-old nephew. I know this for a fact as my nephew wandered into the kitchen and out of nowhere said, "Girls are gross." I asked him why he thought that, and he said they get their hair everywhere. And I laughed and went back to the deck to check on the smoker. When I went back in for another cup of coffee, my brother-in-law was standing in the kitchen. He also had a weird look on his face and said, "Hey, man, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" He leaned in and said in a low voice, "Have you noticed anything strange ever happening in your house? I mean, the place is awesome. I know it's brand new. I'd like to think it's just settling. But I was just upstairs getting my clothes ready and about to jump in the shower when the closet door in our room opened and shut a few times. I actually saw it happen on the last time." I didn't know whether to tell him about anything else I had noticed going on, but said, "Man, that's really odd. The house is solid. I watched the thing being built." He just shook his head and said, "Well, maybe I had one too many beers last night." But in my mind, I thought, he only had 2, and my brother-in-law can tie one on. I didn't say anything else, and he said he was going to get ready and tell the troops that they needed to get dressed as well. Not for the rest of the day, but he was organizing a touch football game in the yard with the kids. That's an old tradition in their family I had forgotten about, and I said I was going to be there too. No way I was missing out on some early football. After making sure the turkey was doing its thing in our oven and the other turkey was smoking away, I went into our side yard where everyone was throwing the ball around and trying to divide up into teams. We started playing after a few minutes, and there were tons of laughs, and my neighbors came over with their kids to join in. After a while, we took a break to grab some water, and my neighbor's son, who was a brilliant kid, asked me who the girl was in the window and why she wasn't playing football with us. I said, "What?" And he pointed up to one of our bedroom windows and said, "That girl with the long black hair, how come she's not playing?" My niece on my sister-in-law's side has long black hair, but she was playing with us, as was my niece on my brother-in-law's side, but she's blonde. When I looked up at the window, there was no one there, and I said, "Who are you talking about?" And he said, "I just saw a young girl with long black hair looking out at us." Normally, I would have said that he saw a shadow or something, or maybe the glare of the really weak sun in our cloudy weather. But of course, I thought of the other things going on. I just told him he was mistaken. Everyone was out here having fun, and we should get back to the game. After another half hour or so, we broke up the game and all went inside laughing, and my sisters-in-law and wife yelling at everyone to go directly to the basement and get our muddy clothes off. The 3 women had arranged other clothes for them to tramp through the house before getting showered up in the start of our meal. We all got cleaned up, and my wife came into the bathroom as I was shaving. She shut the door, and she had that same strange look on her face. I knew something was going on, and she said, "Something is happening in this house, and I don't know what it is." She told me that after she had thrown some laundry in the washing machine from the clothes that we had been wearing outside, she'd gone upstairs into the kitchen, but then heard a thumping in the basement. When she went down there, the entire load that had been put into the washing machine was spread out all over the floor. The other clothes were still piled on top of the machine, and the door was wide open. It had never even started. I immediately asked my wife if she was mistaken about putting laundry in, and she said she was not. My wife may be into the paranormal, but she's a straight shooter and would not have made anything like that up. I then told her about the neighborhood kids seeing someone standing in the window of our front bedroom. We were both getting concerned about what was happening. Something certainly strange was going on. We all got downstairs and people were jumping into the charcuterie board and relish tray, gearing up for the main meal. All of the adults were enjoying a glass of wine or a beer, and my wife poured herself a large glass, and I knew she did so because of everything that had been happening and everything that was bouncing around in her head. I checked on the turkeys and they were almost ready, and then I went upstairs to grab something, and my niece, the young lady with the long black hair, was coming down the stairs. I said, "Hey kiddo, what's up?" as I was walking into the foyer, and she was about to pass me. I noticed that our glass chandelier we had hanging from the second-floor ceiling started to swing back and forth as she went under it. I'm telling you, it was right out of that movie Amityville Horror. Thankfully, she didn't see it, but I did, and the chandelier was still swaying back and forth as I went upstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs watching it as it slowed down, and my mind began to race. I remembered something from my college studies and post-grad work on my way to my doctorate about parapsychology, but never really gave it a thought. Now I was trying to think back about its connection with teenagers and poltergeist phenomenon. I was well aware of all the bullshit nonsense that goes with the paranormal, but something strange was happening, and the fact that two of the odd things happened involved my niece had my mind running. We enjoyed Thanksgiving dinner and dessert, and everyone was going to just chill out for the rest of the afternoon watching football or playing video games or just catching up and talking like families do. My wife had solved her problem with the wash and had successfully gotten a bunch of clothes clean, and I was on my third beer just enjoying myself despite all the strange things that had been happening. My brothers-in-law were taking cat naps, and I could hear the kids upstairs laughing and doing regular teenage stuff. Just sitting in my chair watching the game, I heard a loud crash come from the kitchen. The ladies were up in the formal living room up front, and I could hear them chattering away until the loud crash. I jumped up and ran into the kitchen before anyone else, and saw that a large stack of plates waiting to go in the dishwasher that had been sitting on the counter were now smashed all over the floor. No one was in the kitchen. There's no way anyone could have been in there, as I would have seen them walk through our family room, or at least walking out of the kitchen into the dining room, or back into the living room. My wife came in and bumped into me, and I just looked at her wide-eyed. I was trying to piece all of this together. What the hell was going on here? I made some lame excuse to everyone that the dishes must have been on the edge of the counter and fallen off by accident. I blamed myself for being careless, and my sister-in-law and wife helped me clean up the mess. The kids upstairs never heard anything, and none of them came down. The rest of the day was quiet, and around 7 in the evening or so, my brothers-in-law whipped up some turkey sandwiches and busted out the relish tray and other things that had not been eaten during our dinner. I love that part of Thanksgiving, the second Thanksgiving. Everyone was now hanging out in the family room and debating what movie we were going to watch that night. My niece, the blonde one, left the room and went upstairs. And when she came back, she had a strange look on her face. She actually looked like she was upset, and her mother asked her what was wrong. She said she didn't want to talk about it and motioned for her mom to join her in the kitchen. They both left, and we decided on a movie, and everyone got settled in to enjoy it. My sister-in-law came back in the room with my niece and then asked my other sister-in-law if she could speak with her. They both went into the kitchen, and I went in behind them on the auspices of getting beers for my brothers-in-law, but I also wanted to hear what they were going to say. I didn't eavesdrop. I made it clearly known that I was there, and they didn't care. My sister-in-law told my other sister-in-law that her daughter had bumped into her daughter on her way to the bathroom. She said that my black-haired niece was standing in her way on the landing upstairs, and started to say some very awful things to my blonde-haired niece. She was calling her a bitch and saying that she was a worthless human being, and some other things I don't want to repeat here. My sister-in-law went out to talk to her daughter about this, who of course denied being upstairs. Everyone else quickly heard what was going on. I mean, word travels fast in 2 rooms. And we all said that was impossible, because my black-haired niece had been in the living room with us. My niece, who went upstairs, was the only one who left the room. Without going into a panic, I said everyone was probably just tired from the day and we should all just watch the movie and relax. Of course, I got looks from my wife and my brother-in-law who had experienced the weird things earlier that day. But we all enjoyed the movie, and as the night wore on, everyone started to drift off or went upstairs to bed. What happened that night was very odd. When everyone was in bed and asleep, anyone who had a cell phone received a call at the same time. It was from an unknown number, and it came at 2:47 a.m. Everyone's phone either vibrated or rang. Of course, it woke a lot of us up. Those who answered didn't hear anything except a static noise, me included. I didn't know about everyone getting the phone call until the next morning, but the front door and storm door once again were wide open when I wandered downstairs before everyone else. I wondered if there was a connection about those two and the time that they happened. I didn't say anything and just shut the door. We had plans to go to Niagara Falls that day and then hit up an outlet mall in the area so we would all be out of the house, and I thought that was a good idea. Stop thinking about this weird shit until everyone went home, and then try to take a look at it objectively. My wife agreed. We had a blast at the attractions, even though everyone had been to Niagara Falls before. Then we went shopping and then got some dinner out. We got back to the house at around 9:30 that night, and all of the lights in the house were on. I never leave the lights in my house on, save for the front foyer and the outside lights, and I control those with my phone. As we were pulling up my driveway, the front bedroom where my nieces were staying was flicking on and off. I looked at my phone and the programming that I had set up, but it showed that all the lights were off except for the foyer and the outside lights. Everyone got out of the vehicles and was going inside, and the minute the garage door to the house opened, the light upstairs stopped flickering, and all of the lights in the house went out. I had no idea what to do. Everyone saw that. I said to my brother-in-law, there must be something in the electric, and I'd have to get my electrician out to take a look at it. But my brother-in-law, who had experienced the closet door, just looked at me skeptically. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, and everyone was heading home the next day. We saw everyone off and just had that day to crash as our family. Now here's the stranger thing. Nothing happened. I mean, nothing happened for months. Nothing happened for almost the next year. No funny noises, no lights, no sounds, no doors opening, nothing. My wife and I discussed it over and over and could not figure out what was going on, but we both deduced that it had something to do with my niece. Nothing had happened before she got there. Nothing happened after she left. I mean, we weren't looking to blame her for anything, but the coincidence was there. However, things did come back when my niece and sister-in-law visited that summer. A lot of the strange things started happening again. Doors were opening and closing so much and so loud that everyone noticed what was going on. One evening when my niece was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, the entire bed she was on slid all the way across the room and bumped into the wall on the other side of the room. My daughter was in the room to see that happen. Of course, everyone was freaking out, and I was trying to calm everyone down, but my sister-in-law decided that they were going to cut their trip short a day, and my daughter was going to go and stay with them at their house for a week. Again, once my niece left, nothing happened in the house. When I called my daughter during the week just to say hi and check in on her, I asked if anything weird was happening at their house, and she said no. Everything had been awesome. They'd been swimming in their pool, and they went to movies and were just having a good time. Then came Thanksgiving this past year. Again, we were having everyone over, and I knew everyone was thinking about what had happened the year before. But nothing happened. Everything was normal and fine. I have zero explanation for what happened, but after talking to colleagues and dipping into what are often referred to as the pseudosciences, I wonder if there is some shred of credibility to the theories that poltergeist activities surround teenage girls and that time of their life they are growing up in. I don't know, and I can't say. All I can say is nothing like that has ever happened again since this past summer. My wife, of course, read a bunch of stuff on the internet that was a little too far out there for me, but she is convinced that my niece somehow was affecting our house with her abilities that she wasn't even aware of. As my background is what it is, I've never called any of these so-called paranormal investigators to come in and help with anything. But I did talk to some friends who knew some people in a skeptical society who, without seeing anything or experiencing anything, advised there was likely some logical explanation. We were just not coming up with it. At this point, I don't care. I would rather have my dream house to be exactly what it is, a dream house. I don't care to have any of that crap ever happen again. And here's to 2023 being paranormal free for my family. We Summoned Something by Lost Voyage. This happened when I was a teen many years back in upstate New York where I grew up. I had a rather bizarre friend at the time who, despite his own encounters with the supernatural, most of which were unpleasant, insisted on trying to explain away everything with logic and rationale. It used to really irritate me to no end, because he would do this with even cartoons and shows we watched. It kind of spoiled the wonder and imagination for sure. I was and am still fascinated with ghost stories and the supernatural. Pretty open-minded, but I do have a healthy dose of skepticism. One day we were in my room having a discussion about the paranormal. I was tired of him finding loopholes in stories, and of course being a teen, I wanted to be right, so I had found a story I didn't think he could argue his logic into. Because of what happened, I to this day won't relay the exact story I told him, a story I had come across in a book on ghost stories. In fact, I haven't really told many people about it at all. Suffice it to say, the story basically involved a man's ghost being seen by several people many miles away from where he, at that very moment in time, had been killed. A lot of evidence was presented in the story, and so I figured it was fodder for a discussion about ghosts that I would surely win. We talked about it at some length. It was a bright, sunny, and warm day while this was going on, and my parents were downstairs. Though I had some odd experiences in childhood, my home was never considered haunted, at least in the traditional sense. As we talked, something in the atmosphere of my room began to shift. It was subtle at first, but I was sensitive and did notice it. I was so passionate about the topic, though, I tried to disregard it. It felt as if there was a pressure building. Something definitely felt off. It suddenly felt as if we weren't alone, and I was having difficulty arranging my thoughts and expressing them. My room, which had always been a haven for me, always a safe space, always with good energy, began to become a very unpleasant and unfamiliar place to be. My friend's face suddenly went blank, and he stopped talking. I hadn't said anything to him or indicated how I felt up to that point, but when I started to say something else, he stopped me and said, "Wait." At that moment I blurted out, "You feel that too?" He merely nodded, and his eyes went wide. We decided at that point that whatever was happening was too uncomfortable, and we needed to vacate my room. It didn't feel threatening or dark or evil, but it was as if we had become enveloped in some sort of cloud that had a pressure to it, and it didn't feel right or normal. I remember we moved quickly down the hall and went downstairs, but whatever it was still with us. I can see it all clearly in my mind even now. My mom was sitting on the couch and slightly distracted, but I told her we were going outside, and she nodded and told us it was okay. Looking back, it was so bizarre. I could see my mom, but it was as if she was separated from us by some sort of field, like we were in some kind of fog. The afternoon sun was still streaming in the window behind my mom, and I could interact with her. But I felt cut off. Reality definitely wasn't running right. We went outside to the garage, but it was still with us. I couldn't feel the sunshine, the warmth, and the normal outdoor sounds of a village street had all but ceased. I began to panic, not because of the entity, at this point I wasn't truly aware it was a presence, but because it felt as if I was cut off from the real world, so to speak, as was my friend. Looking back, I have trouble really relaying what I felt and saw. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered, until I recently heard a story that brought it all back. At that point, we tried to flee, to outrun it, and we started down the tree-lined street I lived on, moving towards the downtown area. Then it happened. We got down to the first intersection of a side street, and suddenly it was as if we stepped through a curtain, as if the field had shattered, and we were suddenly thrust back into the real world. It was gone. I felt the sun, and it was warm. The street sounds had returned. I could hear children playing, birds chirping, someone mowing a lawn. The fog had lifted. It's as if we had stepped out of a vacuum of some sort. We both talked about it, but couldn't arrive at anything rational. It shook me up for sure, and later when I returned to my room, the old familiar warm and safe feeling of my room had returned. That alien presence had gone. I asked my mom later if she had noticed anything unusual when I had talked with her during the episode, and she only stated I had appeared subdued at that time. To this day, it's not something I can explain. The feeling of unreality, the closest I can come, is like when a person's sick. Everything feels off. Reality isn't our day-to-day experience when we're sick, perhaps because of our physical senses being overwhelmed. I know because many people who have been sick with colds or the flu describe a similar feeling, and I've had it too. It's why I hate being sick. Did my feelings of fear play into it? I'm certain it amplified the experience for sure, but it did not cause it. The fact that my friend and I noticed the change in atmosphere at the same time without saying a word about it to each other, and the fact that it left us as suddenly as it had come on, makes no sense. Fear usually takes some time to come down from. It's not something that occurs at the snap of someone's fingers, unless it's not your fear you're feeling. I'm somewhat empathic, so I'm no stranger to someone else's emotions coming and going into my space. Although fear can inspire a feeling of unreality as well, I've experienced extreme anxiety and panic, and know the difference between that sense of unreality and what I went through that day. It was totally different. I've gone over this from several different angles, and it took some time to realize that there was some sort of spiritual presence there that day. Most of whatever fear and panic I had were directly related to the fact that I felt as if my sense and connection to reality had been turned upside down, not from a potential ghost. I had felt no evil or malicious or negative feelings in whatever was there. The story I related to my friend wasn't even scary, just a bit creepy. The kind of goosebumps you can get from hearing something bizarre and unexplainable. However, because of what happened that day, I refused to speak the story aloud again. My conclusion is somehow in discussing the supernatural the way we had that day drew something to us. Either a drifting spirit or the object of the story itself. Perhaps it was just curious or wanted attention. Maybe it realized it was freaking us out, and that's why it left so suddenly. Since that day, I make sure I'm protected whenever I so much as read a ghost story, either on internet forums or in books, much less speak it aloud to anyone. I firmly believe that you don't need a Ouija board or a fancy seance to summon a ghost. Merely being curious and having an open mind can provide a portal for these experiences. I've had it happen enough that it has been entrenched in me. This experience was a key in forming my beliefs in the supernatural and continuing to fuel an endless fascination in these types of encounters, as well as anything in the spiritual realm. However, it doesn't mean I wish to encounter ghosts myself. It happens, of course, but for me, it's enough to read and study the experiences. I don't go looking for them myself. That, I know, leads to trouble. Take that as advice if you will. I will mention in closing that my friend later on sort of went into some darker spiritual matters, as he had some personal issues. So he may very well have been key in summoning this spirit, ghost, entity, presence, whatever. He, as I mentioned earlier, had some rather unpleasant supernatural encounters prior to this experience. And of course, we were both teens, which has endlessly been speculated about in poltergeist happenings, though this experience doesn't fit that category. So again, maybe it was just something that could have contributed. I know it wasn't my imagination, yet I can't find too many rational justifications for what occurred. But I concede that I could always have overlooked something. Yet another bizarre, fascinating story from my past. She Was Magic, submitted by Cherry O. I lost my grandmother when I was 32 years old. I was very close with her as I was the only granddaughter she had out of 7 grandchildren. Sure, she loved my brothers and cousins, but there was a bond between us that went very deep. I was into just about everything she shared with me. Her love of baking and knitting, bingo and game shows on TV. I still do all those things, and I am a certified game show nut. I was even on The Price is Right once, but never got out of Contestants Row. But my grandmother was so proud of me, even though I didn't do much to get on other than the standard stuff they ask you to do to be chosen as a contestant. It was a sketchy time in my mid-20s after that, a time where I made a lot of bad decisions in relationships and personal habits. I fell in love with a man who would go on to marry me at 25, beat the shit out of me for the first time at age 26, and introduced me to speed on top of my already hefty drinking problem. I always kept my job, always went to church, but sometimes wearing a little more makeup to hide the beatings, and usually drunk to numb the pain. But my one constant was my grandma. She was always there. At first my family was too, including my brothers. But after my mom died, telling me I was breaking her heart by staying with my man although she was really dying of cancer. I should also mention my dad died when I was 12 in a car accident. My brothers blamed me for worrying my mother and pushing her into a too young and untimely death. They said me hanging out with the wrong crowd and marrying my husband put too much worry into her. Maybe they're right, I don't know. After my mom died, my grandma was all I had, and she was much more patient with me than my mom or my brothers. There were plenty of nights that I stayed with her, afraid to go home to my husband when he was on a run, and one time he did come looking for me there, but just one time. While I was hiding there, he showed up hammered and banging at the back door, yelling for me. We were watching TV when it happened, and I just cringed. Grandma patted me on the knee and said, "Stay right here. I'll be right back." I did as I was told, and I don't know what she said to him, but things got very quiet, and she came back in the room smiling. He left and never once came back to my grandma's house for as long as he lived. When I asked her what she said to him, she only replied, "Magic, honey." She smiled. Magic that will one day take care of him and take care of you, but not in the same way. That night she talked to me straight and told me I needed to get out from under him, that I was welcome to stay with her as long as I wanted to stay, and it would be another year before I left my husband and took her up on that offer. When I did, my grandmother got me into a rehab and supported me getting clean of drugs and booze, and then I went to live with her. My husband and I were separated but not divorced. He never came by, but he would send letters and emails saying the foulest things to me. He tried to paint me poorly on Facebook with old friends and even tried to get me fired from my job when I went back to it. Thankfully, my boss is great and supported me through everything. He still does. But then my husband made a mistake. He sent a threat to my grandma, and she did not take it in stride like I took my lumps and threats. I'd seen her angry before, but this was a different look. I'd never seen it. Her blue eyes seemed to flash like ice under the moon. And when I asked her if she was okay, she just nodded and said, "Oh yes, I'm fine, honey." Another year went by and I was finalizing my divorce when a second threat was made to my grandma. This time her eyes seemed to go black. That was also the night she told me that she had been sick for a while and had hidden it from me. Cancer, just like my mom. Her prognosis was not good, and she decided she didn't want any treatment, didn't want to fight, and by the time I found out, it was too late to do anything. I cried and cried when she told me, and I even got angry and shouted at her. She just hugged me and told me it was going to be all right. That's when I saw the letter my husband had sent to her. It was a threat that he was going to kill us both. Real genius right there. I was planning on using it as evidence in the divorce and for a stronger restraining order. But I wouldn't have to. 2 nights after all that happened, there was a bad thunderstorm. I woke up with the lightning flashing and my grandmother sitting in a rocking chair in my room. She was smiling at me and said my troubles were over with my husband. and her pain was over too. I asked her what she meant, and she just smiled and said, "Magic, honey, magic." I got up to give her a hug, but as I got near her, she held up her hand and said, "I love you, honey. Please stay healthy for me. Find a new man, have kids, and eventually a granddaughter of your own. I have to go. I love you so much." Then she faded away. Just like that, faded right out of sight. I stood there for a second before running down the hall to her bedroom to find her lying in bed with a smile on her face. I touched her cold hand and knew that she was gone. I cried for the longest time before calling my oldest brother to let him know that she had gone, and he said he was on his way over and would call the police. It wasn't for another 2 days that I had found out that my now ex-husband had died the same night. He was having a bunch of his asshole drinking buddies over for a party to celebrate his soon divorce. I guess they were all on our old back porch, and he kept telling the dipshits that he saw a flashing light in the rain at the edge of the yard. Beer in hand, he went to investigate, and all they heard him yell in the darkness was, "You! What are you doing here, you crazy bitch?" Then he yelled out my grandmother's name, "Lana," followed by a "No! No!" 2 of the guys made official statements to that. The time of death was just before my last conversation with my grandma, or what I believe was her spirit. I'm 43 years old now. I have a great husband and 3 kids. I have a special room where I do all my knitting with a TV that I only watch game shows on. I have pictures of my grandma all over the room. Pictures of her alone, pictures with my family, and pictures of both of us throughout our lives. When any of my kids look at them and ask, "What was great-grandma like?" I say she was magic. This is a true story, whether you believe it or not. My grandma was magic until the very end. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear on this channel or my podcast, send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. And of course, if you've got a scary or crazy story for Valentine's Day, send that along. If you haven't, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends, and of course follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.